Welcome back, guys. What is going on? Tinted Visors podcast, episode 31. It is the off season, so we are ripping content week in, week out. We have a lot to talk about. There's some news, and then we're going to go into the Pacific Division outlook and just see what each of the teams did during the off season so far. We have it all. It's the off season. We're ready for it. With that being said, let's get into things. Before we get going, we're going to do card of the day as always. And for me, we'll call it in theme. He was a free agent signing a couple years ago. We have a former Tampa Bay Lightning, Andre Palat, a gold inscribed auto, number 249. It is from Ice, Glacial Graph. Super nice card. Obviously, that gold on black combo really looks good. Huge fan of Andre Palat. Obviously, when he was with the Lightning, would love to see him win another cup, whether that's with the Devils or with another team. But always cheering for him. Great card. Such a nice look. The Ice collection, honestly, they have some really cool cards, especially with the see-through material. But yeah, that's my card of the day.
Yeah, sweet card, and I think it was inscribed, right? It said "Go Lightning." Sick card, yeah. Key member of the twin line from back, or the triplets, not the twins, I guess, the triplets. So my card of the day, we are going on theme with a free agent signing here. It is a slab. We're going with the Chandler Stevenson Young Gun, PSA 10. Has obviously revived his career with the Golden Knights and priced himself out of Vegas, getting a massive payday from the Seattle Kraken. Sweet card. I can't remember when I picked it up, but I picked it up for super cheap. It was a PSA 10 Young Gun for I think it was $20. Jumped all over it. I'm not sure if the value's gone up, haven't really checked, but always going to hold a special place in my heart. I think this was actually my first slab I ever purchased.
But getting straight into the content, guys, I know I said there would be news, but we figured we would just push that and merge that right in with the division outlooks. Starting at the bottom, we're going to go with the San Jose Sharks. Won the lottery pick this year, picking Macklin Celebrini, and he joins a big list of prospects in that organization. You look at Sam Dickinson, who also comes in that draft, Philip Bystead, Tommy Bordelot, Mukamu Dallin, Quinton Musty, just to name a few. They have a very deep prospect pool. And although it's going to be a tough watch the next couple of seasons, they have a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, and you touched on a few prospects and you left out some massive names, which just shows how deep that their prospect pool is. They brought in Colin Graff last year. Will Smith was drafted last year as well. And then looking at a graduated prospect up front, William Eklund is primed for a breakout year. He looked really good last year. He's looking to take another step. And yeah, this offseason they brought in some veterans, signing Tyler Toffoli, claiming Barclay Goodrow off waivers, and then also signing Alex Wenberg. They're looking good. They acquired Jake Wallman in a salary dump from Detroit, which buffs up their defense, which is clearly their weak point. But yeah, this San Jose team is going to be super exciting to watch. Good mix of veterans and young guys. Look for them to still, be towards the bottom of the standings, 8th, maybe 7th. But yeah, exciting year for San Jose. They're looking to acquire another top pick in next year's draft.
Yeah, you mentioned the veterans, and although they're not coming in to win and help the team go for a cup, but they are helping the team and bringing some playoff experience, some veteran experience, and at the end of the day, they're helping them reach the cap floor. I think that's why Wenberg gets $5 million. That's why Toffoli gets $6. Like, not to say those guys aren't worth near that value, but those are pretty high cap hits just for a team who's trying to get to the cap floor. We mentioned some prospects. Those are hitting the forward, hitting the defense positions. One thing that they're sort of missing out is a big goaltending prospect. They are running the Vanacek and Blackwood tandem right now. I'm not sure how sustainable that is for the future. I would love to see them either go out and get or draft a future star goalie.
You mentioned Tyler Toffoli and his contract. He is 32 years old, but they did decide to give him some term. They gave him 4 years at $6 million AAV. I think he's brought in to really be a veteran and teach these young Shark players what it's like in the NHL and how to win, because Toffoli's been there. He's won a cup. He knows what it takes. So overall, I really love the 4-year contract.
San Jose, Caden, how many years are they from the playoffs? And what kind of status is the team in right now?
For status wise, I think they're on like the back end of their rebuild. I think they're really close to competing. I would give them, 2-3 years of just letting the young guys play. On like optimistically speaking, I'd say not in 2 seasons I think they'd make the playoffs, but I will say 3 to be conservatively. I think they can squeak in to the playoffs as a wild card in 3 seasons and then really be contending in 4 to 5.
Moving up to the next team, going up the standings from last year, we have the Anaheim Ducks. They'll have roughly $20 million in cap space. No real signings, though, come free agency. They did trade in a guy like Brian Dumoulin and Robbie Fabry, just a couple veterans to help out both the forwards and the D. It looks like they're trying to get better within. But Caden, what do you think of this roster?
There's not much to not like other than this is a very young forward core up front. And you compare them to the Sharks, I think the Ducks are just a few years ahead in regards to prospects and graduating. You have a lot more prospects who have graduated and prospects that are ready to graduate. In Cutter Gauthier, Trevor Zegras has been in the league a couple seasons, even Mason McTavish last year. So this team to me is just a few years ahead of the Sharks. I think they're ready to give these young guys the ice time, and I'm actually really excited to watch this Ducks team as well. I'm excited to see how Cutter Gauthier plays up front, and that's where I'm going to throw back to you, Kenny. Daily Faceoff has Cutter Gauthier on the first line left wing, alongside Leo Carlson and Troy Terry. How many points do you think he can get next season?
Well, I don't think he stays on the first line. I do see him having a pretty productive season. I could see 45, maybe 50 points as a rookie if he plays the full 82 games. I think he's really built his game in the NCAA. You mentioned a lot of the young players. It's a really exciting pool to watch. Even the defensemen, you've got Zellweger, Minchukov, Tristan Luneau. That's a bunch of very high-end prospects. And you've got a guy like Cam Fowler who can really lead them and show them the way in the NHL. Their goaltending, Dostal looks like the goaltender of the future, but they still got a guy like Gibson on the hooks. Do you think he gets traded, or do you think his value is pretty much at an all-time low?
It's tough to say. If it were up to me, I think the Ducks should have traded him like even a couple seasons ago. I think it is extremely late, but you have Dostal. He's ready to take the reins. I don't think there's any need to keep Gibson around. So, I would hit the phones. I'd be talking to GMs. I'd just be testing the waters to see what teams would be willing to give up for him. So, if you can get a first, even a second, I think at this point, I think it's worth to take it because Dostal is your future. And if you can get anything for Gibson at this point, I would take it.
I think they need to do something quick because once the season starts and you make Dostal your starter, Gibson as a backup, his value is just going to plummet even more than it already has. And yeah, we talked about all those prospects. We didn't even mention their third overall from this year, Beckett Seneca, probably one of the biggest surprises of the draft. I'm sure he's a couple years out of the NHL. But speaking of that, how many years are they out of the playoffs? Do you think the Ducks can contend soon?
I think their contending window is actually pretty soon here. I think they can be in the playoffs in as soon as one season, depending on how these young guys, develop. But I think they're contending in probably 2 to 3 years around the same time that San Jose is just getting into the playoffs. I think the Ducks are just a few years ahead. But yeah, I think they can make the playoffs not this season, but as soon as next after this one, and then be contending in, 3, 4 years.
Yeah, I think they're very capable of finishing fifth or sixth in the division and leapfrogging a few teams. I think there's a lot of potential in their roster. But yeah, you're right. I don't think they're a playoff team this year, but it could come very soon for Anaheim. Once again, moving up the list, next up is the Seattle Kraken, roughly $11 million in cap space left. Thinking about bringing just the talent brought in, I would say they're probably second to the Nashville Predators in terms of free agent signings. They brought in both Chandler Stevenson at $6.25 million for 7 years and Brandon Montour for 7 years at $7.14 million. Caden, what do you think of these moves?
I really don't love it for Seattle, honestly. I don't like the term. They gave them both the full 7 years, like you said. And Montour, just paying him over 7 million. Yes, he's been producing, but I think he is due for some regression. I would have rather seen them, give that ice time that Stevenson and Montour are going to get to some younger guys, let them develop. I don't think that this Seattle team is able to contend with their current roster. I think just all the vets they picked up from the expansion draft, I think they just need to move on, get some picks. It seems like they're going for a retool almost and trying to build around a guy like Matty Beniers. But honestly, I would way rather see a full rebuild from them. I just think there's too many aging veterans on the team that won't be able to perform.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't really like the term. The dollar values are there. You can deal with them, but the term is just a little too long. A couple young guys in their roster. We mentioned Matty Beniers. Ellie Tolvanen had a really good resurgence since coming over from Nashville. And then Ty Cartier, big AHL guy, didn't really have the greatest NHL season last year. And then a couple prospects, Jaeger Furcus, Edward Sal, a former first rounder, Shane Wright. We'll talk about him in a bit. Riker Evans, and then the guy they got this year, Berkeley Catton. Very forward heavy. not much D prospects. I would have liked to see them again. I would have liked to see them pick up a D in this year's draft. But what do you think of their prospect pool?
Yeah, their prospect pool is okay. It's not great. There are some blue chip names in there, like you mentioned, Berkeley Catton, who they just drafted. But yeah, I think we both had Seattle taking a D man with their first round pick this year. And they opted for Berkeley Catton, which, I still like Catton as a player. I just would have way rather seen them, maybe go with Zane Perek or one of the other D men that were available in order to bolster their defensive prospects.
Shane Wright, is he a full-time NHLer next year?
I think the answer has to be yes. And he played 8 games last year. He had the 5 points. It is a very small sample size, but I think he deserves to be in the NHL. That being said, if they're only going to be giving him fourth line minutes and he's only going to be playing, 8 to 10 minutes a night, there's no point in even having him there. You're going to stymie his development and you're going to ruin him as a player. So if that's the case, I think they move him to the AHL. But if I were the Seattle Kraken, I would start to move on from some of these, serviceable NHL forwards. I think just get them off the books and, give that ice time to a guy like Shane Wright or even Ty Cartier in order to aid their development.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's either top six ice time, maybe top nine ice time, or just send him to the AHL. There's no point in ruining his development, giving him fourth line minutes, or letting him sit from the press box. You mentioned those veterans. They've got 8 of them making over $3 million, all with some sort of no trade, no move clauses. It's just a plethora of not necessarily overpayments, but just like too much depth. I think they should move on from a couple of these and really give Shane Wright a chance. With that being said, are they playoffs next year? What sort of status do you see them in?
Yeah, it's tough. They were honestly, I kind of compared them to the Calgary Flames last year. They're kind of just extremely mediocre, not bad enough to tank for a top pick, but also not quite good enough to really go on a playoff run. That being said, I could see the Seattle team squeaking into the playoffs. We did have them making the playoffs last year, but the sophomore slump of Matty Beniers really hurt them. That being said, if their vets can step up, if Matty Beniers can bounce back, I do see this team as being, a first round exit and a wild card team at best.
Once again, moving up the standings, we are at the Calgary Flames. Kind of surprised they have a lot of big time contracts, but they still have $21 million in cap space. Um, I don't think rebuilding is kind of an option with all the term and money that they have invested in their players. But anyway, they brought in Anthony Mantha, Ryan Lomberg. They extended Igor Sharangovich to a pretty good deal. And they also traded in Kevin Ball and signed Jake Bean. So, sort of rounding out both forwards and D, Caden, what do you think of Calgary?
I like some of the moves they made, and then others not so much. I think moving on from Mangiapane for only a second was a mistake. I really like him as a player. But then you look at the Jacob Markstrom trade, which I really love, getting a first, getting Ball as well, a left shot defenseman. So some of their moves are great, some of them not so much. I really liked picking Perek up in the top 10 there with that pick. I think he fell too far, and I think Calgary's going to jump on that. So I think, they're looking for a bounce back year from Jonathan Huberdeau. Nazem Kadri, really lived up to that contract, especially on, not a great Flames team. I think he had a really good year last year. But yeah, you're kind of just looking, you're kind of handcuffed, like you said, with these contracts like Huberdeau, like Kadri. So it's going to be tough for the Flames, and it'll be interesting to see how they navigate themselves out of this one.
Yeah, I like most of the moves that they made. It's pretty low risk. Anthony Mantha at just over $3 million, Lomberg at 2 million. It's nothing too much and it's nothing too long, so I think it's fine. Some of the younger guys in their organization, they got Honzek, a first rounder from a couple years ago, Pelletier, a first rounder from 5 years ago now, so I'm not sure how much upside he still has. Hunter Bustevich, who they brought in from the Canucks, could also be a pretty good defenseman in the future. One thing to note, Dustin Wolf will most likely get the starting role, if not sort of a 50-50 with Vladar. What do you think of this tandem, and do you think it could be like a Devin Levi situation?
I think Wolf has been biding his time in the AHL. He's proved he can dominate at that level, so I think he is ready for the NHL. I don't want to see him be the number one. I would love to see a tandem, a 50-50 or 60-40 in favor of Dustin Wolf, I think would be super ideal. But yeah, you see what happened to Devin Levi this past season. He was thrown into the starter role and it did not work out. So I think the Flames, I don't think they're in any rush for Dustin Wolf. I think they play him with what he's comfortable with. I think 60-40 at most would be a very ideal.
So lots of term, lots of contracts. We say they can't rebuild. How do you think the Flames finish next season? Are they out of the playoffs or inside?
It's tough. I could see them, I think, being in the wild card hunt. I don't think they're competing for a Pacific spot 1 through 3. I think Vancouver, Edmonton, and Vegas are all even LA. I would like to see them get another top 10 pick. I think that could really help them. But yeah, they're handcuffed with these contracts. They're kind of just destined to be mid, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. As much as I would love to see them just tear it all down and rebuild, there's too many guys that have to move out, like Kadri, Huberto, Mackenzie Weegar, and it's just something that you would never see in the NHL. So they got to push for it, I guess. I think full season Kuzmenko could help them with that. I could see him bouncing back. But yeah, they're going to have to fight for a wild card spot because I don't think they're going to crack a top three position. Continuing on, we have the Vegas Golden Knights, a disappointing end to their season last year. A lot of people saw them as cup contenders. They ended up going out in the first round. Right now, they have just under negative $4 million in cap space. So a lot of moves would still have to come before they are ready to play next season. But they got a lot of good players. They brought in some lower name guys such as Victor Olofsson, Alexander Holtz, and Ilya Samsonov, a couple guys with upside, and I guess they're just hoping on them to bounce back. But Caden, what do you think of Vegas' roster?
Yeah, like you mentioned, they're negative 3 mil for cap space. So who's going on LTIR next? Ooh, so who's going on LTIR next? Who knows? I think Mark Stone. I don't think it'll be Mark Stone. I think he's paid his dues. But yeah, I love the moves Vegas made this offseason. They took chances on guys who have shown flashes, like you said. Olafson almost scored 30 goals just a couple seasons ago, and Holtz was a former, top pick in a draft. And then, Ilya Samsonov has shown at times that he is a very good goalie in this league. So overall, I like the moves they made. I don't like moving on from Logan Thompson, but at least replacing him with Samsonov to make that tandem with Aiden Hill, I think it's very solid. I think the Golden Knights are a playoff lock.
Yeah, I think so too. I think they will for sure go for the third seed. Um, Losing Marchessault and Stevenson, I think that leaves some pretty big holes in their roster. So they're going to need a guy like Tomas Hertl with a full season to sort of step up and fill that. Their defense still a very reliable top six, maybe one of the best in the league. But yeah, they don't really have too many young guys who can sort of step up in these situations just because they tend to trade away their first rounders or their prospects. It's tough when they trade away all these young guys because then when you do have guys moving on in free agency, there's no one on their ELCs who can easily replace a guy like Marchessault or Stevenson. But with that being said, are they still in contention? Where do you see them finishing this season?
I think they're absolutely still in contention. Just with that forward core, and you mentioned the D core, this is still a very solid Golden Knight team, even after losing Marchessault and Stevenson. But yeah, look at Jack Eichel to have a huge year as that number one center. I think, he can maybe break 100 points this year if he, exceeds expectations. But yeah, I can see this Vegas team finishing as high as the 2 seed in the Pacific and then as low as a wild card team again. But either way, like I said earlier, I think this team is a playoff lock.
Jack Eichel, 100 points. A bit of a hot take there. We should do more of those. Um, but yeah, I think they're a playoff lock for sure. But eventually they're going to run into the Oilers or the Canucks, whether that's in round one or round two. I don't really see them getting past them. But, Vegas is notorious for making big deadline acquisitions. So I wouldn't expect anything less from them there. It's going to be an exciting season to watch for Vegas. Once again, moving up the standings, it is LA in that third seed last year. I think personally they're destined to fall from that third seed spot. But anyways, they have $10.7 million in space still. But they do have a few RFAs like Kaliev and Byfield, so I'm sure that's going to eat away at some of that cap. They did bring in a guy like Tanner Jeannot, Joel Edmondson, Darcy Kemper, and Warren Fogle, just to round out, obviously the depth. Caden, what do you think of these moves?
I like the Jeannot trade. I think he still has some upside. He was showing the signs in Nashville, didn't really show up for Tampa Bay, unfortunately. So now he's in LA. I also like the Warren Fogle signing. I think beefing up that bottom six, middle six is, it's a solid move. I'm not a huge fan of the Kemper trade. I think they gave up on Dubois, but, we'll see how that ages because Dubois did have that extension. But yeah, just poor piece of trading from Rob Blake. Obviously, we've touched on it before, acquiring PLD for that huge haul from the Jets just a couple seasons ago, and then turning around and trading him for a declining Kemper. Really just a head scratcher there, but we'll see how the trade ages.
Yeah, I remember last year I was talking about the Talbot Riddick tandem and how that would be unreliable long term. And I turned out to be right on the most part. And I don't think Kemper Riddick tandem is any much of an upgrade on that, even though you're paying it $3-4 million more than last year. I think it's going to be another year of unreliable goaltending for LA. I think their defensive core is very strong, but again, if you don't have that goalie stopping those pucks, you're not going to win many games. The Joel Edmondson contract, I think the dollar value is fair. The 4 years is a little bit much. I would have liked to see 2-3 year deal at the max. But I like most of the trades that they made. A couple young guys in their roster, obviously, like I said, Byfield and Kaliev are up for extension, and Alex Turcotte, I would love to see him find some success in the NHL full time. Obviously, dealt with a bunch of injuries. A couple other guys, Brant Clark could get a spot this year. I would be really interested to see him in the NHL, as well as Akil Thomas, Canada's golden goal scorer a couple years ago at the World Juniors. He's been doing really well at the AHL, so I'd love to see him get a chance in the NHL.
So, Kenny, looking at these rosters between Vegas and LA, assuming Edmonton, Vancouver lock up the 1 and 2 spots again next season, who do you think gets the 3 seed in the Pacific?
I think it's Vegas for sure. Um, LA, like I said, I think they're gonna fall. But then again, there's no other teams in the Pacific that I can see jumping over them and taking that fourth seed away from them. So I think the fourth seed is destined for LA this year. Obviously, they could surprise me, but just with the trend that they've been going on, first round exit after first round exit, and just running it back with the same core every single year and expecting something different, it's just not a good look. I think fourth fourth seed is what they're going to make, and a first round exit again. Um, Potentially the last season for Rob Blake, the general manager. Next one up on the list for the Pacific Division is the Edmonton Oilers, the Stanley Cup finalists, running it back with virtually the same roster, except I think they've upgraded. They brought in Victor Arvidsson as well as Jeff Skinner, both on short-term deals for $3 and $4 million. Very respectable values. Caden, what do you think of this roster? How far do you think they can go?
Yeah, I love the roster. They're basically running back the same decor, but they did upgrade the forward core. Yes, they lost Warren Fogle, but they are bringing in, like you mentioned, Skinner and Arvidsson. And if Arvidsson can stay healthy, I think that's a really solid contract. I think it's a tidy bit of work from the Edmonton Oilers front office. Then you look at Jeff Skinner, 1 year, $3 million, kind of a prove it deal. But yeah, I love it. And Kenny, we talked a bit about it, how their wingers and the guys, they have Nugent Hopkins right now on the third line center, according to Daily Faceoff. But a lot of these guys are interchangeable and can move up and down the lineup, which I like a lot. Knobloch has a lot of flexibility with this forward core and can put the lines in a blender whenever he really feels like it. For me, this Oilers team could very easily go back to the Stanley Cup Finals. This Edmonton team looks really good heading into next season.
Yeah, Jeff Skinner could very likely play his first ever playoff game, which would be huge for him. But yeah, you mentioned the depth. I mean, having Nugent Hopkins, Evander Kane, and Ryan McLeod on your third line, and then having that Henrique, Connor Brown, and Jan Mark line as your fourth line, that's crazy depth right there. So I think, yeah, they could definitely run it back, make it deep again. One thing for me, I think if Stuart Skinner gets off to a slow start, I think they have to trade him, or I think they have to bring in another goalie. I just don't think he's reliable in the long term for them, especially if he has a shaky start. Just looking at their roster, Dreisaitl's contract is up after this next season. Most likely comes back, but you never know. And if he does, it'll be at a much higher cap hit. And then after that, Connor McDavid's contract is up. So it's basically win now mode for them before they have to pay these guys like 13 and $15 million. So if Stuart Skinner gets off to the rough start, I personally would trade him and look for a more reliable goalie.
It's funny that you bring up the contracts, Kenny. I was just about to ask you what has to happen in order for Leon Draisaitl to walk after this season.
I mean, worst case scenario, you just miss out on the playoffs. But yeah, I mean, I think it's cup or bust for them. I think even a second round, maybe even a third round performance is not enough for him to stay. Obviously, he gets to play with the best player in the world, but I could see him thinking that as kind of a downside and wanting to be the number one guy in another team. He could basically walk on to 95% of the NHL and become that number one guy. So I wouldn't blame him if that's what he wants to do. But then again, if he does get a cup this year, I could see him wanting to stay and wanting to win more. Worst comes to worst, if they miss the playoffs or early exit, I could see him walking in free agency. And last but not least, the winners of the Pacific Division and going all the way to the second round, Game 7 is the Vancouver Canucks. Made a few acquisitions in free agency this year, bringing in Jake DeBrusk as the big fish, top six forward. Also, a depth guy in Danton Heinen, who is coming home to BC, as well as a signing in Vinny Desharnais. Caden, what do you think of these moves? Is this enough to push Vancouver over the edge?
I love these moves. Honestly, you finally give PD just a solid top six winger. We all saw the Mikheyev experiment last year. It obviously didn't work. I love how they moved on from that. And we missed out on Gensel, we missed out on Toffoli, but we pick up Jake DeBrusk, which honestly I'm super happy with the fit. And I think he's going to slide in perfectly on PD's wing. I think Jake DeBrusk can, on PD's wing, I think he can score 30 to 35 goals this next season. Maybe another bit of a hot take. But I also love the dollar value. The term is a little long, but PD's locked up, and if the fit is what everyone thinks it's going to be, I think this is PD's right hand man for a long time to come.
Yeah, you mentioned Jake Gensel and Tyler Toffoli, and I think it's kind of a blessing in disguise that they don't get them. I would much rather have Jake DeBrusk at 5.5 as opposed to Gensel at 9 and Toffoli at 6 if they would even sign those contracts with Vancouver and not ask for more. I think, like you said, he's going to be the perfect wingman for Elias Pettersson. A couple young guys that are in the depth charts. We have Lekarimaki, Atu Ratu, Baines, Podkolzin, Willander, Elias Pettersson, the defenseman. Do you see any of these guys making it into the NHL roster?
I would love to see Podkolzin make the team again. He already has some experience with the big club, but spent most of last year in the AHL. Yeah, just a big power forward. I think he would slot in nicely into that bottom six. But similar to Shane Wright, like we talked about, I really don't want to call him up if we're only going to be giving him 8 to 10 minutes a night. And, with the depth on this Vancouver team, that's what it looks like it would be. Even look at Jonathan Lekarimaki to maybe make that jump, or just stick him in the AHL just to get accustomed to North American hockey. But yeah, this Vancouver team is competing. They did bring in some depth guys, like you mentioned. And even the addition of Kiefer Sherwood, it really shores up that forward depth. So not sure if there's going to be room for guys like Lekarimaki or Podkolzin.
One thing I have a problem with this roster is just the defensive depth. Obviously, losing Zadorov was a big deal. You're looking at Carson Soucy and Tyler Myers as rounding out your top four after Quinn Hughes and Philip Roenick. I don't really like that as your top four. And then finishing off the top six, you're looking at Desharnais and maybe Derek Forbert. Again, I don't like those two as a top six pairing, and I don't know if that's going to hinder them. They do have two very strong goalies, so that could make up for it, but that's my only issue with the roster.
But yeah, you mentioned that bottom pairing, Vinny Desharnais and Derek Forbert. I think they can be a really solid shutdown, penalty killing pair. But having them on the ice 5-on-5 is a little bit concerning to me as well. So look Vancouver to make another move this offseason to acquire a top four defenseman.
Prediction time. Are they a lock for the 1 seed, and how far do you think they can go in the playoffs?
I don't think they're a lock for the 1 seed by any means. I think they are a lock for, one of the 3 Pacific Division playoff spots. Realistically, I see them slotting into the 2 seed. I think Edmonton is able to take away that 1 seed just with the moves they've made this offseason and coming off the Cup final appearance. But in terms of playoffs, I think, meeting up against Edmonton in round 2 is going to be a massive series once again. I think this upcoming season, I think whoever they play in the first round, barring anything crazy happening, I think they are able to move on to that second round against Edmonton, hoping to give them a run for their money, hopefully healthy this time with Demko and a Game 7 Besser.
We will see what happens with the Vancouver Canucks and the Pacific Division. That is our outlook. Obviously, there are bound to be more moves happening this offseason, so we will obviously update you guys when it happens. Next week, we will flip over to the Eastern Conference and pick one of the Metro or Atlantic to dive into. But let us know what you guys think. That wraps up the content for today. Like I said, let us know what you guys think of the Pacific Division and our outlooks. Again, we keep saying it. It's the off season. We're going to have a lot of content for you guys, so stay tuned.
Yeah, as boring as the off season may get, Kenny and I are going to do our best to keep pumping out content, interesting content for you guys, just to stay engaged. And the off season is long, but before we know it, the puck will be dropping in October.
But they will gun you down. Oh, you know she wild inside emoji. Oh, you got a frown. Tomato to my haters.